Welcome to the Fantasy Football Forge. My name's Steve, and today we will go over more than just the quarterback rankings, but in this video we will go over the quarterback rankings. I have done all of my projections, which you can see over here, for all of the positions. For these videos, what I have decided to do is I'm taking the consensus rankings from Fantasy Pros website and then comparing them to where my projections have them, especially this early on in the season with so few sample sizes. As we get more and more of those sample sizes, I will be more likely to side with the projections over feelings. So that is what we'll be going through. I'll just be going through, I've highlighted all of the major differences between these projections and the consensus rankings. My projected rankings have Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, all in the top 4, which goes right along with consensus. The first big difference would be Carson Wentz here at number 5. Obviously, he's had 2 big weeks, so that makes some sense. That said, Philadelphia is the 4th worst matchup for quarterbacks, so that would bring some concern into this matchup. That would be part of the reason why there is a blue over here instead of red. Just a quick reminder, over here are my temperature gauges. Red represents like the fire in a forge, so that is a good thing, whereas blue, being cold, is a bad thing, and white is just average. Also on here you are seeing the expected floors and the expected ceilings. I believe that is pretty self-explanatory, so if you're looking for a good floor play for a week or a good ceiling play for a week, these are the numbers that you'll want to compare your comparable players amongst each other with. And then using this heat gauge, you can help to say, Patrick Mahomes is likely to meet or exceed this ceiling because he's in a matchup where there's a lot of factors working in his favor. And of course, you can still use that heat gauge here for the expected ranges, just saying maybe he's more likely to end up on the higher end of this expected range. And I think the expected range is fairly self-explanatory. Just to clarify too, this is a range where I'm expecting these players to hit within over 50% of the time. So now we can get on to Carson Wentz's matchup here against Philadelphia in the 4th worst quarterback matchup. So here is a good way for me to explain another factor that ends up going into these, which is how good or bad of a matchup is this for these players. So Philadelphia being the 4th worst quarterback matchup, I do not use defensive good or bad matchups just purely based on the fantasy points allowed, or there's other systems out there too. I think that's the most common, is just how many points they've allowed to a position. But rather, I use a compared to the mean, how many more points is this defense allowing to a specific position, or fewer points allowing to that position on a week in and week out basis. So it's really easy to explain with just 2 examples, and here's a good one to explain. So in week 1, Jared Goff had roughly 17 fantasy points against Philadelphia. However, in week 2 against Washington, and that's a big factor, Jared Goff had roughly 28 fantasy points. That means that Philadelphia had 11 fewer fantasy points scored against them via Jared Goff. So that means that it's a tough matchup. Here's another reason why they are the 4th worst matchup. Kirk Cousins had a pretty darn good week 1 against Green Bay with 21.4 fantasy points, but then last week against Philadelphia, he only had like 11 fantasy points. So there's again another 10 points difference there between the 2 weeks, both working in favor of Philadelphia. Now, Jared Goff did play probably the worst defense in the league against the pass in Washington, and Kirk Cousins had a Kirk Cousins day, as far as he never seems to play well when he's in those Sunday night, Monday night games, under the spotlight type games. He just give him a noon game or a 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock game, and that's where he does well. So the big question is, are we believing that Philadelphia is the 4th worst quarterback matchup? No, I don't think that is going to remain the same as we get more sample sizes in here. I highly doubt that I will have Carson Wentz ranked as in my 5th spot, and I will get the rankings up underneath these throughout the week here. But I will have my final rankings on Sunday, and you can join me live on Sunday morning before the game for any start-sit decisions. And I always put up all of my rankings on the screen along with my beautiful face. Now let's move on to Tua Tagovailoa. I'll never get that right. Who has the single worst quarterback matchup going against Buffalo. They were the single worst last year as well, already are this year. It's a really tempting matchup to play Tua in. I do believe in this ceiling, but there is definitely this floor risk going up against Buffalo. They've done darn good against some pretty darn good offenses over the past couple of years. Tua is probably a trap play this week. Regardless, if you need a ceiling, he is one of the players with a higher ceiling and maybe the best ceiling that you will have access to this week. So, something to keep in mind for him. Then Justin Herbert, rightfully right in there. Jared Goff, much higher here. This is not a great matchup for Jared Goff going up against Minnesota. I do feel it's probably a safer matchup than Tua is. Probably a similar ceiling as well. So I will probably have Jared Goff ranked above Tua, trusting the projections to some extent here. And then Kyler Murray was not a big enough separation to highlight, but I will say I am afraid of a major bust game for Kyler. Any of these weeks, this could be the week. That offense has been not looking great, very much not efficient. So we'll see if they can make some changes. You're probably not sitting Kyler, but just be aware, especially if you have some other great option, that there is some bust potential with him, as the floor shows there. And then Joe Flacco is... Do we need to go over Joe Flacco? I'm not believing my projections on this one. He's had 2 great games. Cincinnati's had a rough start to their season. But yeah, Cincinnati, we'll get to Joe Burrow. The Jets, it feels like a get-right game, right? And there are reasons to believe that it could be a get-right game for Cincinnati. So Joe Flacco will not be this highly ranked in my rankings. Marcus Mariota, he might be a little bit higher than the consensus of quarterback 18. He comes in as the quarterback 11 here, and his heatometer here, the thermostat there for Marcus Mariota is off of the charts. He's red hot in this matchup against Seattle, the 4th best quarterback matchup that there is. But there is some concern on this thermostat. I think it might be reading a little bit wrong right now because Marcus Mariota had 72 rushing yards in week 1. Do you know what his career average is? It's just above 20. So I'm not expecting that to be something that we should expect from Mariota. Probably won't even see that again this season, or maybe we see it one more time. I don't know. If in this next game, if he has like 35, 40 rushing yards, then I will believe that maybe he really does have that kind of bigger rushing floor that might be a part of this Atlanta offense. But I do think that was more of a anomaly than anything else. So with that being said, Marcus Mariota will not be this highly ranked, but I do think that he is a safe option here going up against Seattle. And then we got Derek Carr, followed by Trevor Lawrence, which I have 6 spots ahead of consensus at 13 compared to 19. T-Law is in the 6th worst quarterback matchup, so that's not pretty. I do believe a lot of the reason that he is ranked this well probably comes down to opportunity, number of throws that would be expected in this game. So that's probably what's propping up his floor. And then the ceiling is probably going to be efficiency with those opportunities against the fourth worst matchup. So T-Law is not really a safe option this week, but he is another high upside kind of play here. It's tantalizing. I would like to avoid playing him this week against the Chargers if I can. I do think that is a bit of a trap matchup. We can follow that up with Mac Jones. Baltimore is a plus quarterback matchup. I don't understand how he got this highly ranked, but he did. I will be moving him down in my rankings. Enough said on that. Nobody's starting Mac Jones, are they? If you're in a 2 quarterback league, I guess this is a slightly promising, like, especially if you're forced to play him. But, you don't want to play him. And that brings us to Baker Mayfield. Feels the same as Mac Jones off the tip of the tongue, but he is currently the 15th ranked quarterback on the season, at least in my league. Might be a little bit different depending on scoring rules. And he came out to 15th this week, so that's hard to exactly argue against as some sort of average projection there for him right now. Part of what's probably working in his advantage here against New Orleans is they are a plus matchup for quarterbacks. We'll see where he ends up in the rankings, but not buying this one either. Then Justin Fields here sitting in the middle. I don't know why he's projected this high. I don't know why the consensus has him this high, but I'll probably stick with it to some extent. Might move him back a little bit, though. Houston is the 3rd best matchup for quarterback. Now, if you saw my quarterback rankings last week, you would be aware that week 1 really murdered a few of these our typical quarterbacks, like Joe Burrow here, and Matt Stafford, and Aaron Rodgers, and Tom Brady, to differing extents where they were all down here. Matt Stafford had the best week 2 out of them, so he is climbing out of the week 1 hole here. He is in a quarterback-friendly matchup. It's actually the 5th best quarterback-friendly matchup here, going up against Arizona, so I will definitely be moving him up in my rankings. Somewhere around 9 feels probably correct. Which brings us to another surprise with Jacoby Brissett coming in at the 18th projected quarterback, and he is the consensus number 32 quarterback. I assume that has something to do with what people think of Pittsburgh's defense when they think of Pittsburgh, but I will bring up the fact that Pittsburgh is currently the 9th most quarterback-friendly matchup to play up against, and he, Jacoby, is currently the 21st ranked quarterback. So it makes enough sense to why he would get projected here. As you can see, there isn't much of a ceiling. That's probably the big issue with him, is what's the upside to playing Jacoby Brissett. Let's move on to Kirk Cousins here at 19 in my projected rankings, number 7 on the consensus rankings. Believe it or not, Detroit is not actually a quarterback-friendly matchup, despite giving up 30 points to Carson Wentz, who did have roughly the same amount of points against Jacksonville, but they also gave up 27 points to Jalen Hurts. So why aren't they a good quarterback-friendly matchup? Oh, because Jalen Hurts scored like 38 points against Minnesota. So, yeah, that's not working in Kirk Cousins' favor over here. But that wouldn't really show up in the projections. It's just, we're going to believe week 1 more than last week for Kirk. Would I rank him higher than Matt Stafford and Joe Burrow here? I think it's very possible I would end up having Kirk put between Stafford and Burrow. Maybe Burrow a spot higher than Christian Kirk. Kirk Cousins, holy cow. Followed by Matt Stafford. The one concern for me with Matt Stafford is Arizona has a history of shutting down the number 1 wide receivers for teams. What does Stafford do when Cooper Kupp's gone? If they can successfully shut down Cooper Kupp, what happens? So, I believe there should be some history from last season to look at how Arizona did against Cooper Kupp. that will probably be my final determining factor for making a decision on how high to rank Matt Stafford. But you're playing all of them this week. So then we go to Daniel Jones, Jimmy Garoppolo, Jameis Winston as, not starters, and Joe Burrow down here going up against the New York Jets. Believe it or not, the New York Jets are not a quarterback-friendly matchup so far this season. However, the New York Jets are nowhere near the same pass rush that the Cowboys and the Pittsburgh Steelers had, at least in the case of the Pittsburgh Steelers, when they faced Cincinnati. And Cincinnati has a new offensive line, and one thing about offensive lines is you can bring 5 of the most talented guys together, and they're still not going to play their best ball as a unit on day one. There's so much that goes into the teamwork on an offensive line and getting to know each other. So this might be a game for that unit to gain some confidence in. If Joe Burrow gets time, then we expect this offense to look like it did last season. So this could so easily be a get-right game for Joe Burrow. I would be pretty willing to bet on that. And we have Ryan Tannehill, Mitch Trubisky down here, Geno Smith, Cooper Rush, and then Russell Wilson all the way down here. He is 11th via consensus and 28th in my rankings. This is the 9th worst quarterback matchup here going up against San Francisco this week. I agree with the projections to some extent here. I don't think there's a heck of a lot of upside to Russell Wilson against San Fran. He'll be further back than some of these guys in my rankings. Then Aaron Rodgers is the consensus number 14 quarterback. He came in the 30 in the projections, so climbing himself out of that early hole. And although last week was much better, especially from a fantasy points standpoint for a quarterback, it wasn't enough to yank him out of here like a Matt Stafford was yanked. Plus, it's not a good matchup. I'm not trying to play Aaron Rodgers this week. Tampa Bay is the current 2nd worst quarterback matchup to be going up against. And if Green Bay, especially if Brady is short with his weapons in this game, would really expect for Green Bay to want to establish the run again and win in some similar form to how they beat Chicago. I would be taking some of those upside shots in similarly, actually sometimes in better matchups, just worse quarterbacks historically. But hey, times are a changing. Some are getting older and some are getting just more experienced but are young and entering their prime. And then Tom Brady. It really depends on his weapons, how high I will be moving him, but he'll be somewhere around the Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson grouping for me, which will be probably further back than the current rankings have them. Maybe more like a 16, 17, 18 range might be about right. We will see. Green Bay is a quarterback-friendly matchup, so Tom Brady's ultimately where he ranks amongst, at least compared to Aaron Rodgers, may just depend on. I really don't think Godwin's coming back, and that's probably the weapon that would make me really for sure move Tom Brady up above Aaron Rodgers. I don't know. It's a horse apiece between them. So that is it for the quarterback rankings. All of these will be up on the website within the next day at www.theFFForge.com. Link down in the description. Thank you so much for joining me. And I will have my running back and wide receiver and tight end rankings coming up soon too. I am going to just go through this process, record the videos, and then I will edit and probably upload all tomorrow, which is Thursday, one by one. Bye-bye.